So, like Jackie mentioned, Dorothy was supposed to be here today doing this presentation, but unfortunately, she, like many of you, is under the weather, so she couldn't be here. And as I was here already and I have been part of this project, I am taking over, so hopefully I can do her some justice. So today I'm going to be talking about a project that we have been part of for the last couple of years on FASD and suicidality. So I want to start by acknowledging the land that I'm on. So similar to Kelly, who you heard from this morning, I am also located in Sudbury. So that is on the land of the Robinson Huron Treaty Territory and the traditional territory of the Atakamekshin Anishinaabe. And then acknowledging the research team, it's a pretty large one. So we have the co-principal investigators, Dr. Dorothy Badry, Dr. Kelly Harding, and Dr. Kelly McMorris, as well as Amanda. And then we have team members, research assistants. And I also want to do a special acknowledgement to those caregivers, professionals, and adults with FASD who've contributed to the research. So a bit of rationale for the research. The point of doing this project was to deepen our understanding of suicidality, and this was underpinned by the Alberta Youth Suicide Intervention Strategy. So we know that suicides is an issue that affects everyone, but it's not very well understood in relation to FASD or disability in general. And there's really little that's known about why suicidality occurs in this population. It's very under-researched, and it's a very underreported problem. But through the research that has been done, we've seen that it's been a concern that's recognized in the FASD population. So looking at some of the biopsychosocial concerns, we see the complexity of FASD and biopsychosocial challenges can exacerbate the vulnerability in this population. So things such as brain differences, trauma, early caregiving disruptions, and substance use. And as mentioned in Jackie's presentation, individuals with PAE and FASD experience significant mental health concerns, including suicidality. So these include ideations, attempts, and deaths. Looking at a bit of the research that has been done, we see that in 2020, Burns et al. Found 39% reported suicide attempts or ideations. 25.8% had at least one suicide attempt. 29.7% reported a lifetime suicide attempt. 24% reported self-injurious behavior, and 21% reported a suicide attempt. And then a 2019 article, 35.2% endorsed past year suicidal ideation, and 13 made at least one serious suicide attempt. So some of the numbers are a little bit different as they kind of look at different parts of suicidality, but you can see they're pretty high numbers, and it's pretty daunting to see those numbers. Research questions that we had for this project. Number one was, what are the biopsychosocial risk factors for individuals with FASD and suicidality? What are the biopsychosocial protective factors for individuals with FASD? What are the lived experiences of individuals? So this includes individuals with FASD, caregivers, service providers, etc., who have interacted with the mental health system across the life course. And finally, what FASD-informed approaches are needed to support existing resources and services for the prevention of suicidality among youth in Alberta and more broadly. So the project was threefold. We first started with a scoping review, and this was to determine what is known about suicidality among individuals and their families. This had two goals. One was to summarize and disseminate current evidence on suicidality and FASD, and to examine the overall state of the literature and identify any gaps and potential directions for advancing research in the field. The second part was an analysis of the Pan-Canadian National FASD database. And then the third part were interviews and focus groups, and this was done with researchers, and experts in the field, individuals with lived experience, caregivers, and frontline workers. So now I'm going to go a bit more in depth in these 3 sections. So the first one with scoping review, we concluded the review with 27 sources or articles. All of the articles had some relatively small sample sizes and predominantly focused on adults or young adults with PAE and FASD. Most of the sources included case reports or documents or chart reviews. There's very limited qualitative research on the experiences of suicidality, and most of the research was published in Canada, the United States, and Australia. The primary focus on prevalence of suicidality among this population was very high, but it was limited detail regarding the nuance of this phenomenon. So there was limited attention to the spectrum of suicidality. There was some speculation regarding risk factors, but again, there's quite limited details in all the sources. And then there was some focus on specific demographics, such as justice-involved individuals with FASD. So one of the questions we asked when doing the scoping review is, how is suicidality measured in the research? So from the 27 sources, we found that 11 measured it by suicidal ideation, 26 looked at suicide attempts, 3 looked at death by suicide, 8 looked at self-harm. And we found the researchers often reported on lifetime suicidality versus looking at just current and not differentiating between looking at lifetime or current. Only 6 of the studies of the 27 had explicit and targeted purpose of exploring suicidality in the context of PAE and FASD. So quite a small amount to look at. We also looked at what contextual factors are associated with suicidality. So again, quite a few of the studies looked at contextual factors and looked at them more in a descriptive way. We did find that some looked at individual factors, so this includes things such as mental health issues and substance use. There were some relational factors, so this can include family history and trauma. And then there's environmental factors, which would include things like foster care and home placement. So the take-home message from this first section of the project, there is a growing body of evidence to suggest an elevated risk of suicidal ideation, attempts, and deaths among individuals with FASD. However, many of the studies lacked clear distinctions regarding the specific aspect or time frame of suicidality under investigation. So like I mentioned earlier, looking at lifetime versus current, and also things like active versus passive. And the literature really lacks a nuanced understanding of the nature, severity, chronicity, and acuteness of suicidality among individuals with FASD. So we really wanted to try to increase this knowledge and research with this project. Brings us to our second part, which is the analysis of the National FASD database. What is the database? It's otherwise known as the data form, and it's unique in its capture of diagnostic, demographic, and adverse outcomes associated with PAE. It provides a structure for communication and collaboration among diagnostic centers, and it provides real-time information on the difficulties, challenges, and needs of those who are assessed for FASD. So the database captures type of diagnosis, physical, mental health comorbidities, recommendations for interventions, specifics of assessments, and demographics. And it provides the first accurate description of individuals with PAE with and without FASD in Canada across ages, sexes, and genders. So looking at a lot of information here, but we knew there was stuff in there that we could pull out that was specific to suicidality and mental health. So the data for the study was obtained from the Canada FASD Research Network's National FASD database. And when looking at suicidality, we defined it as suicidal ideation and or a suicide attempt. So here's just a little glimpse of some of the information that was pulled, and I'll go in more depth into some of these numbers in a minute, but just wanted to give you a little snapshot of what it looks like. So we can see age group, sex, region, living situation. So 25.9% of the sample in total reported suicidality. So similar to those numbers that we heard at the beginning, but still quite a high number. When we're looking at it across the lifespan, we see that in ages 6 to 12, it's 11.9%, 13 to 17, 34.7%, 18 to 24, we're at 35.2%, and then over 25 years, we're at 30.5%. So the two groups in the middle there, adolescents and the transitioning ages, are the highest numbers we have. When we're looking at suicidality by sex, we see males at 25.1% and then females at 27%. So pretty close, with females being a little bit higher. And then looking at suicidality by living situation, we see the highest at the top there, biological parents, 27.2%. And then in terms of group home and institutional, group home is at 51%. And then looking at unhoused and independent, we have 23% at unhoused and 35% with independent living. When looking at diagnosis, we look at FASD with sentinel facial features and without, and then no FASD. And you can see they're quite similar here. So the biopsychosocial factors that were examined was FASD diagnosis, neurodevelopmental impairments, IQ, the presence of co-occurring mental health and other disorders, substance use, sleep problems, history of trauma and abuse, and socio-environmental difficulties. So here's another snapshot of the information pulled. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail about the numbers in a second. But we looked at co-occurring disorders, mental health disorders, substance use challenges, and socio-environmental difficulties. So, as mentioned before, the overall endorsement of suicidality found in the database was 25.9% of participants. When comparing this to other stats, we see that 11.8% of Canadians report. So we're comparing 11.8 to 25.9%. 4% of Canadians report having made suicide plans in their lifetime, and 3.1% of Canadians report having made an attempt in their lifetime. So this really adds to that existing evidence that we saw at the beginning of an elevated risk in this population. When we looked at the age-based differences, you saw the highest rates among adolescents and then transition age youth. And then when looking across the diversity of living situations, those living in group homes and institutional settings were among the highest. And then there was also inherent vulnerabilities associated with out-of-home care. And we saw with the graph where the suicidality did not differ based on FASD diagnostic outcome. So that can suggest that PAE in and of itself may be a critical factor. The complexity of co-occurring mental health and socio-environmental concerns also can add to the risk of suicidality. So trauma and abuse, mental health concerns, and substance use challenges can all equal to that amplified risk. So the take-home message, second part, we see the urgent need for screening and early identification of risk factors. We need comprehensive assessment of biopsychosocial needs and vulnerabilities. timely intervention that's specific to factors that may increase risk for suicidality, and broad suicide prevention initiatives across the lifespan for individuals with PAE and FASD. And this brings us into our third part, which is the voices and lived experience. This is one of the parts that I've personally been helping with, and I think probably the numbers are staggering, but I think the voices really add to the research and is probably one of the parts that I kind of find maybe most important, and that kind of hit home for me. So what we did here, we had qualitative research interviews and focus groups. So the purpose of this was to better understand the experiences of suicidality among individuals with FASD. So we did interviews with professionals that included researchers, clinicians, and frontline service providers. So this was about 14 of them. We did a survey and interviews with caregivers with 6 of those, and then we did a focus group with 4 individuals with FASD. So to start off with a bit about the caregiver survey, this we had 23 responses for the caregiver survey, and it explored perspectives related to past and present experiences of suicidality among children and youth with PAE and FASD, contextual factors that may be related to suicidality among children and youth with PAE and FASD, and it offered crucial insights into the history, pattern, spectrum, and context of suicidality in this population. So the caregiver survey, 30.4% were reported to have ever visited the emergency room because of mental health concerns, most often because of suicidality. 82.6% had at some point endorsed thoughts of wanting to be dead. 21.7% had ever made a suicide attempt, and 65.2% had ever engaged in non-suicidal self-harm. Some of the contextual factors found in the survey, there was a lot of reactive responding. So a quote here that amplifies that is, does not really understand the practical meaning of it. He uses phrases like, when he does not like what is going on, but just wants it to go away and or stop. Or she often just wants to die when she makes a poor choice. I know I have a couple more minutes, so I'm going to try to quickly go through the rest of this. There was also feelings of shame and not fitting in by a lot of individuals with FASD that their caregivers saw or felt. So quote, when she is overwhelmed with feelings of sadness, that she is not what she considers to be normal, she has thoughts of ending her life. And then there was also feelings of general hopelessness. Quote, she often said she just wants to fall asleep and never wake up. Now I know these quotes are quite, can be quite hard to read or to see, so I don't really want to rush through them, but we can definitely go back to some of these for you all to read over. In some of the caregiver interviews that were done, there was a lot of mention of suicide talk. So youth not being fully being able to comprehend the meaning of statements like, I don't want to be alive. So many youth with FASD may not have the skills to cope with distressing emotions and may engage in suicide talk to express their desire to escape these emotions. Caregivers express the high levels of emotional reactivity and volatile emotional dysregulation, and the experiences of mental health, substance use, and traumatic life events. I'll share one quote. Sometimes the suicidal thoughts come from anger at themselves or anger at us. They'll say things like, I hate myself, I can't stop my brain from doing these things. I hate you, I don't want to be a part of this family. I wish I was never here. It's really emotional, just so intensely emotional. I just want to share this quote as well because it kind of gives side and more of a positive outlook. Quote, their peer group is seriously the greatest thing that could have ever happened to them. For a long time, they didn't really have friends and didn't know how to have friends or make friends. So the strong peer group that they have developed really has been amazing. And then I'll quickly go through individuals with FASD, and then we have professionals. I'm not sure, Andrew, if we have enough time for me to finish. So the mental health support we found with the focus group done with individuals, that mental health support is not geared towards individuals with FASD. Some methods may be successful for other people, but it does not work for individuals with FASD and can sometimes exacerbate the issue. We see impulsivity as a major risk factor, not always being able to understand the severity of self-harm, and having a sense of community is a major protective factor, as we just saw in that last quote. So one of the quotes is, "It's regular psychology for regular people thinking," for people who can fill in that blank. So saying, regular psychology doesn't work. We can't just, always talk about our issues and everything's okay. And I'm just going to skip to, this is maybe one of the more important, or the one quote that kind of sticks out to a lot of people, is a lot of people don't want to die, they just don't want to live. And I think this really speaks to, if they have the right supports, then this won't be the case. So then finally, we have the professional interviews. And talking with the professionals, we found that they said without being FASD informed, it becomes harder to get through to the clients. Taking just a simple course is not always helpful. Until you've worked and lived with it, you don't really know. The way we support people with FASD is the way that we should be supporting everybody. And these principles should be foundational. So one of the quotes is, "People have been diagnosed with FASD. It's not going away. They have FASD and will for life. You're really just trying to mitigate the adverse outcomes." I just want to skip to the end here for some overall take-home messages. So we see for this project, suicidality is a major concern in the FASD community, but research is very limited. It's important to include a wide range of stakeholders and voices, including individuals, caregivers, families, and healthcare and social service providers. Through this whole presentation, we've seen there's a lot of shared voices. Through the scoping review to the database to all of the interviews, we see a lot of the same themes and a lot of the same sentiments coming up. And then finally, tailored resources and services are needed to consider all biopsychosocial factors. This is my last slide, a couple key recommendations, and these ones are specifically came from Dr. Badri. The workforce responding to FASD has one of the most complex jobs possible, and training in responding to suicide risk is critical. Recognizing the risk and trying to discriminate between what is a real risk of suicide requires a team effort and assessment by mental health professionals. Continue to invite mental health professionals to the table for consultation. Recognize that individuals with FASD act out on suicidal impulses when they're in pain. Do what you can to discover the source of pain and to shift directions. Acknowledge how hard life is for individuals with FASD and keep a clear focus on moving forward in life. Provide instrumental support as often as possible. Distraction and redirection are critical tools to use. Always seek medical advice where appropriate. And finally, best practice on responding to FASD is evolving, and you have played a critical role in contributing to new knowledge. So that concludes my presentation. I know it was a bit of a whirlwind. You can reach out to myself or Dr. Badri or Dr. Harding. I have their emails here and I can also put them in the chat.